It says that I'm live. Am I? This is the first time I've used this sort of camera feature. Is that working correctly? No, it's not. No, don't do that. Do this. Anyway, I wanted to continue off of what DBJ was talking about this morning, because it was a really awesome discussion. Like, you should check out his video. I linked the. If I did this correctly, I linked the video down below. But I'm not sure if there is a down below with this, how this is coming through. Let me just double check if I'm actually streaming, because I've never done the streaming thing of the way I'm doing it now. I'm trying to use one of YouTube's new sort of features. Look at that. Well, it seems to be streaming. Wow. Not much of a delay. Cool. That's my echo of me coming through. I'm going to stop that because that's kind of annoying. Now that I've seen everything is actually, working. The chat DBJ had the unfortunate thing, like, the video was awesome. There's a lot that's talked about. The live chat was indeed lively. A lot going on in there. It's pretty fun. But unfortunately, those live chats don't get saved permanently with the stream, so I'm going to instead try to continue the conversation here and share my points of view while still drinking coffee. Anyway, a discussion about taverns, and a lot was going on in chat, and there was a point of view that was on the end of the spectrum where taverns are not this cool thing, right? And how I see taverns, or one of the ways I see taverns, are a sort of culturally defined communal meeting space, right? A place where a community sort of meets and engages. The reason taverns, I think, are such a widespread thing, why they are so used, why there are so many tropes and stereotypes revolving around taverns, is because the culture in the fictional worlds that get like the most gameplay are Eurocentric fantasy settings, and culturally the meeting place was kind of a tavern, right? But if you change the culture or the subculture, that meeting place can change as well, though the tropes can still be applicable. Just the nuances change. Doesn't have to be a tavern. The tavern is the cultural equivalent, the Eurocentric cultural equivalent to a communal meeting space. It's a very good place for people to meet together. If you're running a modern game, the tavern is, like a bar or a club. I mentioned in the chat before, like Harlem's Paradise, the club in Luke Cage, or Pop's Barbershop, which is the barbershop in Luke Cage. That was another sort of cultural meeting place, though the nuances between the two were pretty large. I don't want to give away any spoilers or anything, but anyone who knows Luke Cage knows that Harlem's Paradise is more of the criminal underbelly's cultural communal meeting space, while Pop's barbershop is more, it's the self-proclaimed Switzerland of the hood. But if you look at other sorts of venues and other sorts of inspirations, like the Jackie Chan's Legend of the Drunken Master, instead of a tavern or a tea house being the major communal meeting space, originally it was the sort of local sort of farmers market type thing, local marketplace where they were selling fish and snakes, and, where everyone went to get their stuff. Everyone was kind of part of the community. They were friends with one another. They had their own stalls, and it's where they all met together and they chatted and stuff. And that's another good communal meeting space dictated by the culture, right? DBJ was mentioning how there could be, a grotto with, where they go down to smoke some herb and, chill with their feet dangling into the warm water, relaxing as a community, chatting, and it's the word tavern was used a lot, but essentially it's the same thing because it's a culturally defined meeting space. Even in the same Eurocentric culture that would utilize a tavern, the local marketplace could be defined by the subculture. Depending, if you're not a local, you might drop by the marketplace and get information there, meet a bunch of people, get the temperature of the sort of area you're in. It was mentioned that in smaller places, a church would be where people sort of do the same things. And a church is not a tavern, but it's still a communal meeting space defined by a culture or a subculture. Like the nature of the church could differ as well, depending on the culture or subculture. Hell, you could hang out and in a coffee shop and deal with baristas, right? Say you were playing Vampire Masquerade or some such game, Call of Cthulhu, and you wanted to have a what is that cipher system game again? The Strange, where instead of you go to a tavern, you all meet up and stuff happens, blah blah, right? It could be you could go to your Starbucks would be the tavern, the culturally defined meeting space. You find out about stuff, and maybe there's a couple of guys or girls, people that work there that are into the occult and they know this stuff, and that's where you unite or get your quests. It's a little bit different, but it's still a culturally defined culture/subculturally defined communal meeting space. Generic Nerd, what's up, brother? Yeah, Generic Nerd says, yeah, definitely seems like these places that we tend to use are where you would assume normally to find a melting pot of cultures or subcultures, right? Yeah, it's I think tavern might have been, not intentionally, but might have been a little overused or allowed for a sort of cognitive dissonance. And I'm just offering my point of view. Oh, that's you, Nestor? What up, bro? Yeah, like the tavern it's not like the corner store, your local bodega can be the tavern, right? Well, no, it's your local bodega might be the cultural meeting space of this area, and a tavern in a different setting, maybe the cultural meeting space of that particular area, Another thing that got me in the chat, because like I said, the chat for DBJ's video was on fire. Like it was just going. Poor DBJ couldn't. It was just like pow 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 pow, just going. But yeah, the one thing that showed up was how someone mentioned that taverns are kind of boring and uninteresting. And I kind of don't think that way. I think taverns are lively. You know, it was also mentioned how taverns are used as a crutch by a lazy GM. But just because an individual might misuse a tool or incorrectly use a tool doesn't mean that that tool is no good. It just wasn't used in the right instance or not used correctly. Like if you try to use a 7/16 wrench when you should be using, an inch and a half breaker bar, it's not really, you might get the job done, but no, it's not. Just because the tool wasn't used correctly doesn't mean the tool doesn't work. And I think taverns, again, I kind of structure taverns as the local bar, the pub, or maybe even the club where they have music and dance and people get together, get comfortable, tongues and tempers get loosened up by liquor. Things can be going on. You throw your characters. Like I love using taverns. I don't use them when it's not appropriate, like a Eurocentric type of thing. Like I might use yurts or something, maybe a longhouse or great hall instead, in place of where you might have used a tavern. But I love, when applicable, I freaking love using taverns. They're great, you know. Yeah, you can have a bathhouse, but bathhouses, they lead me to believe that it's a little bit more elevated in culture. You know, what do you do with your unwashed masses? The people who don't go to the bathhouses. And that makes me think of like two local taverns. When I have cities, in larger cities, I love using at least two taverns where you have like the sort of low down, dirty criminal spot that even the cops know, oh, this is where the petty crooks hang out, right? And then you have your more respectable tavern, which may indeed still be a hub for criminal activity, but is not so apparent about it. They're the more refined and elegant criminals, the ones who know how to not get caught, go to, right? And I like that idea. I find that stuff interesting, right? Like, I've got a tavern in one of my settings called the Rusty Spigot. It's run by it's basically owned and operated by a construct, right? By a machine. And it's by a wharf, by a salt water. The machine is old and rusty and corroded by the salt. The machine's name is Spigot, and the tavern is the Rusty Spigot. Originally called Spigots, but time where he sells basically pure grain alcohol, horrendous food, doesn't know how to cook, doesn't have any taste buds. He's a freaking robot, right? And mind you, this is in a sort of more fantasy-oriented science fantasy setting. And, the sort of gritty, nasty, poor, underpaid, overworked sailors, that's the haunt that they go to. That's where they go. The unwashed masses, you'll get the smell of old stale BO, the mixed in with the heavy salt water influences in the air, food being burned in the kitchen, in the back, the sound of squealing and smoking, burnt oil and stuff coming from Spigot himself. Sort of bad attitudes and nobody really cares about you. Where you might get like your local stories or your trade stories, or could possibly get info on certain ship captains that sailors just don't like working for and they're willing to dish out and talk crap about. And in the same city, this is like a metropolis like city, so there's two major sections. In the same section of the city on the main road where things aren't so horrendous, you've got a tavern, and the Rusty Spigot is just a tavern. And the next one is a tavern and an inn called Annabella Blues. Annabella Blues. I'm tripping over my tongue. Annabella Blues. Annabella Blues is a lot more refined. It's an inn. They service the people with money, right? They're on the main road into the main city from the docks. They service people with money. They have rooms for the people with money, and they kind of have like an underground sort of back room area that's essentially the local thieves guild. It's where organized crime takes place. And I I don't know how that's not interesting. Like having I forgot the name of it. It was another setting I haven't run in a while, but another tavern that was basically a fantasy version of Hooters, right? Where they were just interested in turning tables as quickly as possible, where all the servers were female, where all the servers were, overly attractive females of primarily human uh, descent, but not exclusively human, where even the bartenders were females. Everyone in the front of house was a female, right? Um, and it kind of treated it like the fantasy Hooters. They had music playing with like a one man band sort of steam tech using all the steam from boiling water to power the woodwinds. And you know, I found that interesting. People dancing, trying to get the denizens to become more drunk. Um, there were town guards that visited that place, uh, a lot of which were on duty at the time. Uh, so I thought it offered a lot of opportunities, and I thought it things like that make me feel like it's interesting, right? Not as interesting as what someone else offered up as a diner with many doors, and each door leading basically to a different dimension, right? That's really interesting, but that seems very specific, and it's not something you can keep having in all these different types of settings. Or maybe you can, since it leads to different dimensions. There's the interdimensional diner everywhere. But it's to say that the idea doesn't need to be limited towards a single solitary venue. A tavern, yeah, a tavern is sort of a trope filled crutch in many instances. It can be used as such in many instances. It can be misused plenty. But a tavern is just a cultural it's a communal meeting space, and the tavern is defined by the culture. Culturally, the communal meeting space would be a tavern, right? Um, in the same setting, a different sort of subculture. If if it was, you know, you wanted to meet and greet and mingle with people in this same area that were religious, that did not believe in, drinking liquor, that liquors were poison, or they just didn't enjoy the company of the types of people that were in taverns. Maybe they were sort of xenophobic in a way where they don't agree with strangers. People who come from outside the city, stay a couple of days, and move on, would usually frequent in a tavern. And they want to avoid that. You want to find those types of people, or maybe go to your local church, right? Essentially, it would be the same thing. You still get your chatty Cathys in church, there's a rumor mill in like everybody's church, right? So you'll have, in a temple, rumors going on, discussion on the back end of spreading a religious or religious oriented a religion or religiously oriented dogma, you know, um, and you'll get a different taste of a region's culture and or subculture, but the essence of what it is the same. It's the nuance. that defines it. It's either being, could be a tavern, a bathhouse, a church, marketplace, the sort of toy shop, famous toy shop everyone goes to, or a local bakery that sells baked goods, or slightly more modern. I think back in the day it was your local butcher shop. You'd get your meat from your local butcher shop, have it cut right there. You chat with your neighbors, people that lived a couple of blocks, and anyone within a couple of block radius, you'd see them because everyone would get their meat from the local butcher shop. you know yeah, exactly, depending on the era. The a malt shop where you get your malts, your ice cream sundaes, your milkshakes, and all this other type of things would be the cultural equivalent to what is usually defined as your tavern. You could still use the same tropes. You'd be sitting in the malt shop, on, because there's a bar area too, a little counter, you got your bar stools, and then you got your booths in the background, your jukebox playing some music, right? And you want conflict to illustrate how it is in the area. Well, you've got your little grease heads up in there, and your teeny boppers and stuff who listen to different types of music that might clash over the music, and maybe you might hear a little bit of a political exchange, as far as maybe the more intellectual ones be like, I don't know, we don't listen to that music here. That's supports the this political agenda and why they, which is not good for that reason, type of stuff. Or just talk to the person serving you the malt, like, hey, how's your day going? Oh, just came into town. Oh, you know what you're gonna want to stay away from. Don't go to the pavilion. They're having a town hall at the pavilion later today, but man, I hear that the greaseheads are going to go boycott that and start some trouble. You don't want to get into that, do you? Like, it serves the same narrative purpose, because at its core, it's the same thing. It is a communal meeting spot. It's just that the nature and nuance of the communal meeting spot is defined by the culture or the subculture of the region, of the setting. And that's all I want. I'm repeating myself because I'm trying to stay on topic without getting too. I'm known to rant and go off topic a lot, so I'm trying not to. But it's that easy. Communal meeting spot that is defined by the culture, subculture, and or setting, and the nuance of it is what changes how it feels, what adds interest to it. But the same tropes are kind of like, even within a. I'm gonna say it because I said it in the chat. Try not to get too far off topic, but if you've ever seen the Dragonlance animated movie from back in the day, essentially it kind of all really started in a tavern, as these adventures tend to do. But it was less about, you go into the tavern and you're approached by a mysterious man that needs help. They were in the tavern, and it was the sort of players, and it was the main characters that brought the conflict to the tavern, right? And because they brought the conflict to the tavern, is how they united as a team. Is how they were brought together, how they united as a team, and how the true nature of their adventure began. Now, granted, some of the characters already had a previous relationship, but I forget their names. There was the priestess, her sort of barbarian boyfriend, and they were being hunted for a certain reason. But the half elf, the kender, and the dwarf, they got into a confrontation before ever going to the local tavern. So they were getting looked at as well, and it's just a different way of using the same sort of trope. Just don't You don't need to, verbatim copy these tropes and stereotypes. Just, use them in a way that is represented by what's going on and what do you want to achieve. And taverns can be interesting. I don't know how taverns are not interesting. People getting drunk, listening to music, and starting shit can be pretty. Maybe nobody's getting drunk in that GM's tavern. Maybe there's nobody there in that GM's tavern, right? Hell, I also mentioned the fact that in one of my campaigns, one of my settings, in the chat, someone mentioned how taverns are really only good or only viable in cities and towns that are large enough that they make sense. But a small hamlet shouldn't have a tavern. In one of my settings, in a very small hamlet that was a sleepy backwater, I had a large tavern and inn. It was an inn and a tavern, and it was big. Doesn't fit there. At the time of running the campaign, it didn't seem to draw the player's attention, but the tavern had two owners, brother and sister. The brother wanted to leave the place, wanted to pack up shop, get all the money, move, and open up business in a place that did make sense, that was financially viable. The sister didn't want to leave because she had too much nostalgia around the tavern. Their parents built the tavern. They were trying to prepare for a different type of life in a new town that was bound to become this, this city that whose major export was wood because it was by a couple of forests and stuff. They were planning for the future, and it just never happened. So the sister didn't want to leave, and the sister was very much about the community. She knew all the people there, and she cared about them. And the brother was like, I just care about you. You family, you come first. Let's get the hell out of here. And she wasn't down for that. So he was trying to swindle and not steal, but cheat like the players out of whatever money he could, because he was trying to get enough money to be undeniable to his sister, right? Like, look, we can leave, we can get out of here, we'll make a better life, we won't have to struggle, we'll take down the building and move the big house with us, right? But the reason that it existed there was a subplot. There was subtext behind it. Subtext that usually doesn't necessarily get explored in games, but there was a reason. And because of those reasons, I found running it interesting. The character of the brother, the character of the sister, how they treated the people that came in, how they treated the players, what was the temperature of the room, what adventures were acquired. Like, they didn't really, it wasn't the trope where they got adventures, so they didn't go to the tavern and say, get their latest adventure. They spoke to a guy who was known as the mayor of the moment, because they didn't really have a mayor. They didn't really do elections. He was just the guy everyone listened to. And they kind of got his missions from him, from the self-proclaimed head of the town guard. And the tavern wasn't the place they went for the missions, but it was a tavern and an inn, so that's where they stayed, and had quite a bit of social interaction. Quite a bit of funny social interaction, because one player smoked an undead with a fork. Stabbed an undead with a fork and used his smite attack and just obliterated the undead, right? Did plenty of damage. So the brother snatched the fork, put it on a plaque, and was like, oh, this holy fork. Which, this was Saturday Morning Tabletops, cartoon oriented. that's why some silliness happened. But this, this fork that can smite the undead, destroys undead. It was like wasn't having it, didn't allow the player to explain. It was like, no, it's holy. Yes, it's holy in his hands. He blah 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 blah. And from that point on, every time they had different characters, or the character retired, left, died, and they came back to the big house, which was the name of the tavern. It was called the Big House. They came back with different characters. He would always try to tell this story about this fork, which was a spoon when the new characters came. And he would tell the story about how he would lie about the knight smiting the undead with the spoon, even though it was with a fork. And he would try to sell the spoon. Again, to get money. The reason he wanted to get money was because he wanted to move his sister the hell up out of this place, which was a center for conflict. Bad things kept happening. They were attacked by a troll. Then they were attacked by goblins, wolf-riding goblins, and bandits. They had people getting kidnapped by bandits, and then they had what they thought was a haunted forest to the north, which was actually just filled with gelatinous enemies that would just digest people, never have them ever been seen again. It wasn't a good place. It wasn't a nice place. It wasn't really a nice place to live. It was like it was like the whole mentality of Tornado Alley, where stuff happens, everything gets destroyed. What are you gonna do? Rebuild. It was one of those. Anyway, I went off on a tangent. I always go off on those, don't I? Going back on topic, taverns. They're cool. Use them. If you don't want to use a tavern, don't use a tavern. Use the same concept, the same tropes, the same ideas with something else, because it's colored by the culture. And this whole broadcast, I feel, is weird because I'm not used to using this new feature. But I think that's enough for now. Bye.